Hello everyone, welcome to Indian Economy by Aman Soni. In today's news app, we shall be discussing the important articles related to economy from the Hindu newspaper. In the editorial page, this article talks about the unemployment rate and the unemployment status in India. It begins by saying that among the Indian youth, there is increasing job insecurity, and the authors give statistics for that. Even before the pandemic, during 2017 and 2018, the National Sample Survey Organization had reported that there was almost 6.1% of unemployment rate in India. And during December 2021, the Center for Monitoring Indian Economy released data which shows that almost 53 million Indians were unemployed. This comes to 7.91%. But because of the recovery in the economy after the pandemic waves, because of the opening of lockdowns and increasing in the manufacturing, the unemployment rate has fallen down slightly. Even now, the figure almost stands to approximately 6.57%. The author tells by saying, even though the government gives reports about the increasing employment rates and various indices, there are certain other indices which show that the claims made by the government and the actual realities on the ground are contradictory in nature. And one such claim is the number of overqualified youth aspirants filing for the middle or lower rung government jobs. And the authors gives example for that. For example, very recently, when the railways announced a 35,000 post advertisement for jobs, the applications was almost around 1.25 crores, and of which many PhD holders and double degree graduates were also applying for the same job, which required a bare minimum qualification. And the number of government jobs are limited, but major people go behind these jobs because of the job security. We saw that during the pandemic, even the middle level people in the corporate sector, many of the companies, they were fired because of the reduction in consumption demand and the reduction in business. But the same cannot happen in the government sector. Even though the work culture, the pay and the nature of work would be very different from the corporate sector, still the government sectors would be preferred by these type of aspirants because of the job security. The authors gives many examples on how the number of jobs to be recruited was very less and the number of applications was very huge compared to the number of posts that were advertised. For example, in September 2021, for the 42 posts which were to be filled as P1, gardener and cook in Himachal Pradesh Secretariat, the applications were almost 18,000. And for 62 posts of messengers in UP police, 93,000 applicants applied, out of which almost 4,000 were PhD holders and 50,000 were graduates. So the author says that this spillover effect has effect on the other job aspirants also. Imagine a place where there is a minimum job qualification for the job as 12th standard, but the applicants who are applying for that are PhD holders. So what would happen to the guy who just passed 12th standard? He would feel insecure, and his capability and skills would obviously be less than a person who has done PhD. So this person who is supposed to qualify for that job, because that is a bare minimum qualification, is facing heavy competition from the overqualified people. And this is directly affecting the economy on both the fronts, because a person who is a PhD is settling for a job which just requires 12th standard as minimum qualification. This leads to underutilization of his skills in the economy, and him studying PhD would not contribute much in a way to the economy because he is doing a job which doesn't require that level of skill set. And this person who doesn't get the job because a PhD holder took away his job, he remains unemployed, and again he is a burden to the economy. And all this is happening because the government's reduced expenditure on health, education and social sector. If the health, education and social sector spending happens properly, it would open up more avenues for job generation, and the amount of competition that we face at the lower level of jobs would not be that much high. And even higher education has to make ready the students to be ready for the job market, but they are not having the current skill set. In order to the higher education to be proper, first we need to invest heavily on the higher educational institutions. Firstly, the major focus has to be to recruit the qualified teachers. Now there is delay in recruiting the professors at public universities also. For example, in Delhi University, instead of appointing permanent positions for the university teachers, the university is currently carrying on with the ad hoc teachers on a temporary basis, which amounts to almost 4,500 people. So the authors finally end by saying, because of the competitive exams for the entry and the overqualified people coming for the lower qualified jobs, it would finally impact the economy, and we should open up avenues wherein the highly qualified peoples would be able to contribute tremendously to the economies, because they would have invested years and time and money and effort into their education. If they are doing some job which is not equivalent to their skill set, it would be a loss even to themselves and to the economy which invested into them. In the next article, poverty rose but income inequality fell. This article talks about how poverty rose during the COVID pandemic, but at the same time, the income inequality fell. Generally, whenever an extreme event happens, like a drought or macroeconomic instability, the major people who get affected because of that would be the vulnerable section, because of their income levels, because of their positioning in the society, they would be affected more than the rich people. The same happened during the oil shock of 1990s and the global liquidity crisis of 2007-2008. But the authors say that even though the pandemic has increased poverty because the income levels of everyone fell, and more people who are on the borderline, they went below poverty, but the pandemic has a different story here. Statistics slightly show a different story here, and that is the income inequalities fell during the pandemic. On one side, we had reports of how the very high net worth individuals, the top richest 10%, their incomes rose very heavily. But here, the income inequalities between the top 25% and the bottom 25% fell. According to the World Bank, extreme poverty is defined where the percentage of population that resides below using the $1.9 income, and this percentage increased from 7.6 percentage in 2019 to almost 11.7 percentage in 2021. This clearly shows that the poverty increased. But the statistics here shows that the income inequality between the top 25 percentage and the bottom 25 percentage reduced. The distance gap between these two reduced. For example, if you look at the average incomes of the top 25 percentage, it was 45,000 in the urban areas and 22,000 in the rural areas. And for the below 25 percentage, it was 8,000 and 7,500 rupees per month. But during the COVID pandemic, the average income of the top 25 percentage in the urban areas fell by 30 percentage. And the top 25% of the rich people in the rural areas, even their income fell. But the fall in incomes of the people at the bottom 25 percentage in the urban areas was slightly lesser. And for the rural areas, the bottom 25 percentage, their incomes increased during the pandemic. The same Reduction in income inequality was observed during the plague of the 14th century in Europe. And to understand the nuances of what happened and why the income inequality fell, we need to understand the three sources of income. Generally, the three sources of income are the government transfer, whatever the government gives subsidies and direct benefit transfers, that one, the income from business and profession, and the labor income. The government transfers would generally be very meager, so we cannot consider that to calculate the data. If we look at the business income, for a rich person, the business income plays a major role. And for the top 25 percentage, because of the COVID pandemic, because of the lockdowns, there was no consumption demand, because of which the business got affected, manufacturing got affected. So the incomes of the rich people got affected. Their incomes from the business profits reduced. At the same time, the people in the bottom 25 percentage, only few of them are dependent on business income. So their income directly didn't get affected that much. And when we look at the labor income, the top 25 percentage mostly are employed in the service sector. And because of the COVID pandemic, all the contact intensive sector like the tourism, transportation, all other sectors directly got impacted, because of which the incomes of the top 25 percentage of the rich people fell. Whereas the bottom 25 percentage, they are mostly employed as laborers in the manufacturing sector. Even though the manufacturing got affected, it was not as much as affected as the service sector. So their incomes also fell, but it didn't fall as much as the fall in the income of the rich people. That is why the difference reduced, the gap between the incomes reduced. But here we need to observe one thing. Here the inequality fell because the incomes of the rich people fell. It is not become because of the poor people got more income. If the poor people got more income and if they had come out of poverty, that would have been a positive aspect. Here the inequality reduced because of the fall in the incomes of the rich people. Now once the lockdowns are over, once the business picks up, again the incomes of the rich people would increase, and again the inequality would come to what it was during the pre-pandemic era. So we need to focus on those aspects which increase the incomes of poor people, because even during the pandemic we are seeing that the number of poor increased, the people falling below poverty increased, and this fall in income is just because the income inequality reduced just because of the fall in the income of the business people, the rich people, because they depended on business and the service sector, which got affected during the COVID pandemic. In text and context, the explainer is about the US supplying liquefied natural gas to Europe. Because the United States wanted the European Union to reduce the dependency on Russia for its natural gas import, USA promised to supply liquefied natural gas to European Union. And here USA will supply 15 billion cubic meters of LNG, liquefied natural gas, to Europe this year, and they would import, European Union would import additional LNG of at least 50 billion cubic meters by 2030 from USA. Now, because of the heavy dependency on Russia by the European Union for its natural gas supply, they are not able to take much actions against Russia, because they are scared that Russia will cut off the natural gas supply and the people in the Europe will suffer during the winter. And we have been seeing news about how the Europe's 40% natural gas needs are met by Russia alone. And for a few countries like Germany, it is almost 80% of the needs. So a country who is dependent mostly on Russia for its energy needs, it can't take any strong actions against Russia, even though it's not liking that action. In 2009 and 2006, the oil used to pass through the Ukraine. The pipelines used to pass through Ukraine and Poland to the European Union. These countries used to get transit fees. Then Russia imposed heavy prices to the oil supplied for Ukraine, because it wanted to affect the government in Ukraine, who was pro-Western country. The government in Ukraine at the time was pro-West, So Russia increased the oil prices to affect the Ukrainian economy. Then the European nations saw that the oil prices which is coming through Ukraine, the cost of is that is very high. So they went for the Nord Stream 2 pipeline which goes under the sea, and it connects Germany with Russia, and through Germany the Nord Stream pipeline would get connected to other European nations and the natural gas would be supplied. And the European nations used to import this natural gas because the Russian natural gas was cheaper compared to the other alternatives. And now USA is promising LNG to Russia, but what impact it will have? Last year Russia almost supplied 150 billion cubic meters of natural gas, and currently USA has promised to supply 15 billion cubic meters of liquefied natural gas. So you can see the difference. In the short term, the supply by USA it's not going to affect much because the needs of Union are 150 billion cubic meters and USA is supplying only just 15 billion cubic meters. So what this 15 million cubic meters would do, at the max, because of the increasing supply, the prices of the natural gas and LNG would slightly fall because some additional supply came. And in the long term, still the European Union is heavily dependent on Russia for its oil and liquefied natural gas. And there are other problems with LNG. The cost of supplying LNG through pipelines is very high, and the European Union has to have infrastructure for importing this LNG. Currently, the natural gas import from the Russia is a cheaper option. That's why Europe was going for this natural gas imports. Now, even though European Union wants to think of diversification at this moment, at the short run, because of the heavy dependence on Russia and lack of alternatives, it cannot do anything but import natural gas from Russia. Maybe over the period, maybe in another 15-20 years, they can slowly look for other sources and diversify their needs. Last month, the European Union declared nuclear energy and gas to be green sources of energy. This would impact their climate change commitments because if gas is declared as green source of energy, then what does it mean? Because it's a renewable source, it's a non-renewable energy, it causes pollution, and that is considered as a green source of energy in European Union. The critics also says that switching to renewable energy by the European Union in the present moment is not an alternative because the European Union, which is situated far beyond the equator, during the winter season, the solar energy is not as reliable as the fossil fuel based energy sources, and the Russian and the European winter is very severe. So because of which they can't reliably depend on the solar energy and they have to depend on the renewable non-renewable sources and the imports from the Russia. So currently Europe doesn't have much choice but to import gas from Russia. In money wise, these are technical articles. These are not important for our exam, so you need not go through them. These are the articles related to economy today. Thank you so much.